or grow it. From the Stash Podcast.
Thank you to AC Infinity for sponsoring today's video. Consider checking out the automatic water sprayer. It comes with a rechargeable sprayer with a 2200 milliamp power capacity. Supports up to 3 hours of continuous water diffusing. You can even modify the direction and spread of the spray with just a twist of the nozzle. Head on over to acinfinity.com, use promo code THESTASH15 and save a few dollars off at checkout.
This episode is brought to you by Stash Blend. I've been using Stash Blend for over a year now, and it's awesome. One of the things that I really like is that it saves me money. It's a whole bunch of different inputs in one. So I no longer have to go out there and buy a silica bottle, then a separate seaweed bottle, beneficial bacteria, then a separate one for mycorrhizal fungi. All of that plus more is in this one blend. Go to stashblend.com to learn more about it, and I also have a link down in the YouTube description section below.
All right, from the Stash Podcast, we are back, and we have a special guest today, Dr. Tassa Saldi. Welcome to the show. We are honored to have you on to be able to talk real science and not just bro science, like sometimes we do. And thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
It's an absolute pleasure. We saw you on Chris's podcast. You guys had a fantastic episode, and I'm sure many people saw it. But if they didn't, real quick, can you give us a little bit of who you are, where you're from, and what do you do?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Tassa. I am the Chief Science Officer of Toomey Genomics. And we are a molecular pathogen testing company, and we specialize in testing for pathogens that are endemic or common in medicinal plants. My background, I was born in Colorado. I did all of my education here in Colorado. I did both my graduate work and my postdoc on molecular biology. And specifically, I focused on something called RNA and structured RNA. So the reason this is relevant is because some of the pathogens or diseases that we're going to be talking about are composed almost entirely of that molecule RNA. So all of my education is understanding how that molecule works, how it infects organisms, and why it makes them sick.
Awesome. And then, so we're going to get deep into hop latent viroid. Can you maybe start off, like, where did it come from? Like, when was it first identified and stuff like that?
Yes, absolutely. So hop latent viroid is named for the plant that it was discovered in, and that's hops plants. So those are the plants that give beer its bitter flavor. So it was discovered in hop plants 1987, 1986. And at the time it was discovered, they didn't notice any negative symptoms in hop plants. And so because it seemed to be mostly asymptomatic, they called it hop latent viroid. So the word latent in the name is supposed to mean asymptomatic. Of course, it didn't necessarily stay in hops. At some point, it cross-species jumped into medicinal plants. And unfortunately, in those types of plants, hop latent viroid is not asymptomatic. It has pretty dramatic and negative effects on the plants. But it has been around for a very long time. When it actually jumped into medicinal plants, we don't know. But based on the prevalence of this particular pathogen and the geographical spread in medicinal plants, it's probably been there for a very, very long time, at least several decades.
What do you think the correlation between hops and the medicinal plant is that would cause this? Like, are they closely related? Are breweries also bootlegging plants?
Yes, absolutely. So hops and medicinal plants are in the same family. So genetically, they're very similar, which is probably why it's able to infect both of them. I think also there has been plenty of cultivation in the past where hops has been growing in close proximity to medicinal plants. And because it's transmitted mechanically, like when you touch or break plants, it's pretty easy for it to transmit in between two different species of plants where it's infectious in both of them.
Now, that's one thing I think a lot of people haven't really thought about this fact is seeing these symptoms. It's not something as common to just walk into a room like you'd see with, like, say, powdery mildew or a pest that you notice this. What would be some signs that you'd even notice your plant would have this disease? Like, how would you even be able to tell visibly, at least?
Yes, absolutely. So hop latent viroid is, it's got a wide variety of symptoms. It can range from being extremely prominent and very, very symptomatic all the way to almost completely asymptomatic. A lot of the symptoms tend to be a little bit generic. Things you could expect to see, or you may see if your plants are infected. There are some growth symptoms that you would see. The plants could be stunted. Sometimes instead of kind of growing like, kind of in a nice stretched way, they kind of grow out more bushy, like a little Christmas tree like. One of the really common symptoms of hop latent viroid is instead of the branches coming off of the main stem at kind of a 45-degree angle, like you would expect, they tend to come off at this horizontal angle. And that makes them very brittle. So a plant infected with hop latent viroid, if you run your hands down it, all of the stems might break as you're putting your hands down the plant. You can also see impacts in the leaf. You can have chlorotic leaves, misshapen leaves. A lot of times the leaves will overlap. You can see symptoms in the root ball. The roots don't root as well. They don't grow as deep or as quickly. And then, of course, the most prominent and unfortunate symptom is that it has a pretty negative impact on the flowering of the plant. So it reduces a lot of the different chemicals that form in the flower, and it can reduce the yield of different plants or of medicinal plants by quite a lot. So that's kind of the gut punch.
Yeah, that sucks.
Symptom
That's
right
like
there.
the worst possible. The end part, everything else, like aesthetically, and then it's like,
Yes.
oh wait, the thing we're all doing this for is just hindering. It's like,
Yeah, no. And the worst, of course, is that a lot of plants during the vegetative phase will show very mild, if no symptoms. And you don't really see those come out until it flowers. So you've spent months investing in this plant, and then all of a sudden it flowers, and it's just fluff, and there's not a whole lot you can do with it. And so it's very insidious. It's probably the most insidious pathogen that infects medicinal plants.
And some of these things, I mean, you know, yellow planted, stunted, discoloration. Some people might think it's like a pH issue, or they might misdiagnose it as something else, and literally they didn't know it's actually hop latent viroid.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about the scale of this problem, some people might think it's a rarity, but really it's not, right? So a couple things I know, I pulled some data. 73% of commercial facilities tested positive for hop latent viroid, and that's based on over 18,000 tests.
Yep.
There's up to a $4 billion loss in the legal industry due to hop latent viroid. Do you have any other numbers for us? Like, do we have any idea of the home grow scale?
Yeah, so home grow is challenging because, a lot of home growers don't necessarily routinely test their plants for pathogens. I can say, like, if you're purchasing clones or plants from, a commercial source, it's very likely that those plants are infected. The geographical spread of this thing is incredibly wide. We've identified it in pretty much every single state where we have data in the United States to make a call, which is most all of the states at this point. We've also found it in Canada, Europe, Africa, Asia. So it's pretty much everywhere, and it's incredibly common. So I think if you go out to purchase clones, it may be more likely they're infected than not. To be completely frank, it's very widespread.
That's wild. And to think home growers aren't probably that reliable for reporting statistics either. So I'm sure it would be a little bit difficult to kind of track who's had and who hasn't had it. And when you say that the symptoms just kind of list off, it seems like it would be very difficult for a home grower to identify. And I'll be honest, if I had these issues and I tried to throw the kitchen sink at it and I couldn't fix it, I'm turfing it and I'm moving on. Right. So it's like trying to identify where and when you have it. That could be really difficult. So what would be for a home grower, what would be the best way we kind of talked on identifying, and what would be the best way to kind of combat it?
Yeah. So the best way to combat hop latent viroid and pretty much any virus or any type of viral like pathogen that ends up in your plants is to prevent entry in the first place. There's no cure. There's no treatment. There isn't really any good ways to reduce the symptoms, at least that have like good evidence. So the best way to do it is to simply avoid bringing plants into your home grow that are infected in the first place. And that requires either testing your plants or, having a conversation with the place you're purchasing those seeds from or those clones from and asking them, hey, can I see some data showing that you've tested these plants and that they're clean? Because if you do bring it in and you spend 3 months investing in this plant with the time and the nutrients and the energy from the lights, and then it flowers and you can't use any of it, then you've not just wasted the cost of the clone, all of that time and energy and everything else. So it's absolutely worth spending the money testing to make sure that it's going to have a good result for you in the end.
So this could come through seeds too, potentially, if I'm hearing you right?
Yes.
Oh,
So
goodness, great.
it's unfortunately, it is very transmittable in seeds. We've actually done quite a bit of research into this. It can be transmitted both through the pollen and through the mother, through the seed. The rate of transmission is somewhere between 20 to 50% if the viroid came in through the mother. It's much less for the father. It's about 5%, but it's definitely seed transmissible, and it's definitely worth testing some seeds from a seed packet before you plant those or pop those, just to make sure they're not infected.
So how would one, let's say for a home grower, how would we go about getting the test done?
Yes.
Would it be lab tests or is there home tests?
Yeah. So right now, probably the best option for a home grower would be a lab test. We actually just are finishing up a project with Advanced Nutrients where we're getting lab tests into hydro stores. So instead of having to log into our website and order, and there's like a minimum order, home growers, hopefully starting in the month of November, will be able to go into the hydro store, purchase a box of sample tubes for a small price. I think it's like $10 or something. And then you send them in one at a time when you need them, and you pay for them when you send them in. So you can buy one test and send it in to see if your one clone that you just bought is infected or not. And then you can send another one in a couple months later. So if you don't want to go through the hydro store, you can also get lab testing online at our website on tumigenomics.com. But I think that's the best option, is to just go ahead and send in a sample to the lab for home growers.
Can you walk us through the process of getting the sample? Like, I know it's, correct me if I'm wrong, is like you got to take leaves from different parts of the plant and you can take the roots. And can you walk us through that process?
Yes, absolutely. So when you test with Tumi Genomics, basically you order tests. You will get a sample tube in the mail. The sample tubes will come with instructions, and those instructions will tell you to just take root tissue. The reason that we're asking you to take root tissue and not any other tissue is that we've done a bunch of studies and basically found that root has the highest level of viroid, and it's the most reliable tissue for detection. So that simplifies, everything as far as where you take that sample from. You take 3 or 4 pieces of root tissue, very small, like basically the size of, like this much of your pinky finger. Put it in the tube, close it, shake it up, and mail it back to us. And that's all that you have to do. And then within 48 hours, we'll send you a message letting you know the infection status of that plant. So it's pretty simple from the standpoint of the person collecting the sample. It's pretty easy.
That is pretty easy. And $10 for a kit at home, at least for a home kit, that is pretty reasonable. Could save you a lot of money in the long run. So to get this right, you can have this tested on any stage of plant as long as you can take a root sample anyways?
Yes. So you can test it in any stage where there's root. If you want to test something that does not have root, it is possible to also send in foliage samples. The smaller the plant is, the more likely that a foliage sample is going to give you an accurate result. So if you've popped seeds or you have seedlings and it's like at the 4 or 6 leaf stage, you can send in a piece of that embryonic leaf and also have that tested as well. But once there's roots, that's really the best place to take the sample.
Now, would that be the best time to start identifying some of these signs? Like, how early on can you maybe see these things? Do you have to wait all the way through flower to really see with the yield being that small? Or do you think, like, I guess a better question would be, would you recommend testing, just because in this day and age, testing before you even get into flower?
Yes, absolutely. The tricky bit about this particular pathogen is that it's incredibly cultivar dependent. So we conducted a study with State House Holdings where we purposely infected 12 different cultivars. And what we observed is that there was some that were incredibly symptomatic, and you could tell, by 3 weeks that these plants weren't doing well. There were some that had very mild to no symptoms. And then there were some that were very, very positive, but never showed any symptoms at all, even all the way into flower, but they were very, very infectious. So you can see like an entire spattering of different types of symptoms. The only way to be sure is to just test everything. Because even if you have something that looks very, very healthy, it could still be infected. And even if it doesn't have any negative symptoms, it can still infect all of the other plants in your grow. And you just don't want to risk bringing something that dangerous into your operation or, your basement or whatever.
Yeah, and I've worked in a commercial facility before, and there's the big hype on getting the huge name cultivar, the cuts from people, let's say in Oklahoma, and they come back here to Michigan, and all of a sudden it's a widespread issue because that same cut gets passed around to this facility, and this facility, and this facility, and now entire rooms. Before it was powdery mildew issues that everybody had, and now everybody has this, and I think having a virus that's spreading so rapidly in an area, it's almost making it so people have to adapt with these different cultivars that are resistant and that can deal with that. Is there any particular cultivars that you've noticed, or any families of cultivars that are more resistant to this issue?
So we've seen cultivars that are more resistant. The one that comes to mind right now is Motorhead. The difficult part about me, like I can say which ones we found resistant and which ones not. The difficult part, especially in the medicinal plant industry right now, is that the Motorhead that we tested may or may not be the Motorhead that you purchase, or whatever cultivar. And so it's really hard right now because the cultivars are constantly changing. I really think your best bet is to just get it tested, because there's no guarantee that the cultivar you pick will be, resistant or asymptomatic or sensitive or not. It's better to just keep it out altogether. And that's the only way we're really going to make any progress in taking this thing down, is if everybody is testing and getting rid of these positive plants. From the MSO all the way down to the home grower. And then we can start to make a dent in this thing and reduce the prevalence of it.
So if you had a plant that's testing positive and you rid that plant from your garden, is there still a chance? Like, I'm thinking like mites here. Is there still a chance that they can linger on the walls or something? Or does it have to come from the cells? Does it have to come from another plant?
Yes. So it must be transmitted from another plant. There are some different modes of transmission, and some of them can persist. So mechanical transmission is the most likely way this thing moves. So if you're trimming your plants and you've got like goo on your hands or goo on the scissors, and then you go to trim the next plant, that's an incredibly efficient way to transfer it from plant to plant. It can also transfer with water pretty efficiently. And so if you have like a clonal tray and you have some clones in there that are negative and some that are positive, and they're all sharing this water, you can end up transmitting it to the entire tray. Insect transmission is also a possibility. There are studies coming out of CSU in Fort Collins in Colorado that are showing that insect transmission does happen. Because it's in such a high level in the roots, I would expect things like fungus gnats and anything that eats and chews at the roots would probably be pretty good at transmitting this thing. And it's really, really stable. So if you have dead leaf material on the ground, or it like you reuse cocoa or pots. Those are all possibilities of transmitting it to any plants that come in contact with that matter, or that you've reused those pots. Now, that doesn't mean you have to throw everything away. It just means that you need to be cognizant or aware that it's possible and sterilize everything. And luckily, the most effective way to do that is bleach, which is available, at the Super Walmart or whatever. So if you do bring in something positive, run to the store, grab yourself a jug of bleach, dilute it 1 part bleach and 9 parts water, and then just clean everything. Wear clothes you don't like because you will ruin them. But besides that, it degrades very fast with bleach. So just clean up everything and make sure it's all sterilized before you use it again.
Yeah, ever since we had that conversation for the Garden Talk podcast, and you had mentioned use bleach, I switched over to bleach. I've been using that same exact ratio that you had recommended, because before that I was using isopropyl alcohol.
Yes.
I was told that is effective at eliminating viruses, viroid, all that stuff. Can you talk to us about how that's actually not the case?
Yes, absolutely. So unfortunately, isopropyl alcohol, or any alcohol, is not only ineffective at destroying or degrading viroids, it stabilizes them. So they're very, very stable in alcohol. They actually did a study with a different viroid with same family, potato spindle tuber viroid in tomatoes, and they showed that if you trim a tomato plant with a viroid, and then you take those scissors and you trim the next plant, you have a 75% chance of transmitting that. If you take those scissors and dip them in isopropyl and then cut the next plant, you have a 95% chance of transmitting it. So it actually makes it worse. So it's better to do nothing than to use isopropyl alcohol, to be honest.
How many people have that isopropyl alcohol, like in commercial grows, sitting there, that's where the shears go when they're done?
Nope.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. No, they're creating a very stable little inoculum that they are using to infect every other plant in the facility right there.
This is where bro science and grow science need to meet, because
Right?
that's a scary one thinking about it. Because that's literally I do consultation in places for marketing, and I'll see that as just a common thing. Like their trim area, they'll have a trim bin, and then they'll have this, and it's just, oh wow,
Yeah.
good to know.
It
There's
is
my next
scary.
video. One thing too is like I'm just so I can understand this correctly, because we're mentioning trimming, and so we're at the final stages of production, and we're trimming, and then so we're going to a hanging and then a curing stage after. There's still a worry of having this virus have a potential negative impact on the plant this late in the process.
So if the plant has already gone to flower, obviously, and you've trimmed it, and it's like 2 weeks away from being finished, giving it hop latent viroid at that point is probably not good. I mean, it's not going to have any impact because it's already gone through all of its developmental phases. It's still incredibly contagious at that point. So if you're trimming and you get goo or stickiness or flour on yourself, if you walk into the mother room, the propagation area, you stand a very high chance of transmitting that to the next generation of plants. So it's more of an infection risk than it is, the plants that are almost completely done, obviously getting it right then isn't going to cause a problem. It's transmitting it throughout the entire facility, or, through your young plants in the basement, whatever.
That's a good distinction.
I didn't even think of it potentially being transferred to the trimming process. I thought you were talking about like pruning, because that's kind of the most common is, pruning the plant with the trimmers and then going to the next plant and then pruning that one. I want to back up to the bleach. I just have a clarifying question for the bleach cleaning solution. Why wouldn't you is it bad to do 100% bleach and then kind of dip it in there versus you're saying dilute it in water?
So it's not bad in the sense that will absolutely work. I mean, that will obliterate it very, very fast. Bleach is very, very caustic. So if you use pure concentrated bleach, it's going to destroy your tools pretty fast. It'll probably hurt your skin, and it's going to, probably even the vapors are going to start, making you feel a little bit funky. So the dilution is because that dilution, the 1 to 9, works within 60 seconds, and it's a lot less dangerous. You could even get a little bit of 10% bleach on the plants themselves, and they'll be fine. Concentrated bleach, not so much. So I would avoid using that because it's also pretty bad for the plants.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point in that bleach is very hazardous to your health. And if you are using bleach at a very high percentage, that could be very damaging to your respiratory system. And yeah, just a point to make very clear. Yeah, if we're using bleach, because a lot of growers are using bleach, no dilution, and they're wiping down their walls of their tent. Not that it's not working,
crazy.
it's just you don't need that high of concentration. It's just overkill. So
could you imagine being in a tent and just like breathing that in? Like that would close your clothes in that little environment.
This is the problem with the lack of science in home
before.
growing. Yeah, it happens to a lot of people.
The
same thing with electricity. Like we're MacGyvering things ourselves without proper education, and that's why I really appreciate you coming on and making this very clear for us, and making this putting this into a layman's conversation, so guys like myself can spread this conversation and awareness at a very basic level, because that's what we need. It just needs to be a part of the conversation, because if what you're saying is true, it's like this is an issue that reigns very high on the Richter scale of things that we need to be concerned about that really aren't even being talked about.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally agree.
And I will add to the bleach thing, since we're on that topic, don't mix it with isopropyl alcohol either, because that does make chloroform, which is generally not a good thing to breathe in. So don't mix it with other stuff either. Just
not unless you want long naps,
right?
Yeah. Disclaimer: don't do it.
Yeah. Just use the bleach with the dilution, and don't use anything else with it.
So, is there anything that makes medicinal plants like particularly susceptible to having the stress like this? Do any other crops show this kind of degrading or stress? If hops doesn't, can it spread to other kinds of crops like between it?
Yes. So the natural host range for hop latent viroid so far that we know of is very narrow. It infects medicinal plants, hops, and stinging nettle, which most of us don't play with anyway. So that's okay. That being said, they have infected other plants with hop latent viroid in a laboratory setting. And I do believe it can infect tomato plants, pea plants, cucumber plants. And so right now, that doesn't appear to be happening naturally in nature, but that doesn't mean that at some point it might not getting into some of these more, staple agricultural crops and causing problems. So it's very well adapted to medicinal plants, and the other things that it infects, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't hop or move into other types of plants as well.
So I know these viroids are extremely stable. And first of all, before we kind of get into the stability of the hop latent viroid, some want to back it up all the way. Some people might be confusing a viroid with a virus. Viroid is different from a virus, it's different from bacteria, it's different from fungi.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break down what is a viroid and actually how stable is it?
Yes, absolutely. So viroids are basically tiny molecular parasites. They are the most simple form of life on planet Earth. So as opposed to, like you mentioned, viruses, bacteria, or, fungal pathogens, they completely lack what's called an outside protection or an outside coat. So most life forms have genetic material, which is the information that tells them how to be whatever they are. And it's surrounded by some type of protection, which is usually made of like protein or fat or both. Viroids completely lack this protection. They are simply that genetic information and nothing else. So this is part of the reason that a lot of the disinfectants that people use are not effective on viroids. Because soap, for example, dissociates fats, but there is no fat component to viroids. So you can't use soap to kill it. Alcohol, same thing. It denatures proteins, but there are no proteins in viroids. So that's also not effective, which is why it's difficult to kill it except with bleach. The other really important thing to understand about viroids is that they are incredibly simple. So they don't have a unique biology per se that can be targeted the way that we can target bacteria, for example, with antibiotics, or fungal with an antifungal, or even an antiviral. Those are all targeting things that are specific about those organisms that is different than the thing they're infecting. Viroids don't really have that, which means that it's really hard to come up with a treatment. It also means like whatever you want to dump on your plant, if it's an antifungal or an antiviral, it's not going to work because this isn't any of those organisms. It's something totally different unto itself. Now, about the stability, you would think because it lacks that outside layer that it would be, really fragile outside of the plant. It would just disintegrate and fall apart. But the viroid's structure has evolved in a way to make sure that it does not fall apart. So it's basically a circle that sticks to itself. So it collapses and it forms like two pieces of Velcro stuck together. And that makes it incredibly resistant to degrading, even if it's outside the plant. So that means that if it's on a surface, if it's on your tools, it can last for days there. It can last for 7 weeks in water. It can last for up to 6 months in plant debris or, in your potting medium or whatever, and years within seeds. So it's a tough little bugger for sure.
That's pretty scary. And I just think about
plant plague.
You mentioned it being in the soil as well. I just imagine all the folks that are in like living soil, for example, and they're reusing the soil over and over and over again. And they could potentially be just passing it on to every single plant that they put into that soil, which is pretty scary there. Now, do we know if, and this might be a dumb question, but if a viroid is inside the medium, for example, can microbes have some sort of interaction with them to where they kind of outcompete that viroid in a way, or what?
So there's no evidence per se that microbes could outcompete it. They're so small, in fact, that viroids have been shown to replicate, like, for example, inside of fungus. So they're more likely to actually infect those microbes than they are to be damaged by them. The one thing that has shown, at least against some viruses, and potentially could also work against viroids, are worms. Because if they do eat that organic matter, it goes through their digestive tract, and that would be something that should degrade viroids. Obviously, that's not 100%, but it certainly couldn't hurt. But yeah, living soil is, I've had so many sad conversations with growers. I'm like, well, best to just start over there.
Sorry, you got to throw this 10-year-old soil out.
I know. It's such a hard conversation, but I'm like, yeah, it's probably not worth it.
But the sooner that you can reason with them and have them toss it out, start it fresh, that's the turning of a leaf. That's the moment where things start to get better. You're not putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. I just wanted to see Chris's dumb question and raise him a dumber question. There's
no dumb questions, guys.
Is there any way that this can go from plant to person? Is there viroids in people?
So there are not. Viroids hijack a part of biology that is very specific to land plants. And so it's really infectious to plants, not so infectious to people. The closest human beings come to something like a viroid is the hepatitis B or D, which is similar to a viroid, but not at all like hop latent. So you can't get infected. It just can totally ruin your flower, basically.
Well, what about something like tissue culture? Would there be any way to potentially preserve a genetic and get rid of this via tissue culture?
Yes. So you can, it is possible to remove viroids using tissue culture. I like to warn people, it is not 100%, and it's a very long process. It can take 6 months to a year to clean a cultivar using tissue culture. A lot of times, if you're a home grower, that isn't maybe necessarily an option for you. The other way that you could consider trying to remove it is letting your plants go through a seed phase. It's not it is transmittable through seed, but it is not 100%. And so if you're willing to sort through those seeds, looking for the traits that you wanted from the original mother, and then identify ones that are negative, you may be able to recover it like that as well. But yes, tissue culture works. It's expensive. It's a long process, but you can clean your stuff with that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for the people who are having these $15,000 cuts that all the commercial grows rant and rave over. And it's like, well, what about when you take that and that has this issue? And like your investment probably is worth that 6 months to a year. And depending, I mean, I haven't tried it, but I know Athena has like a home tissue culture kit that they've been selling recently. But that amount of time and that amount of investment has to be some amazing genetics to want to do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
I will warn people, tissue culture at its base is not difficult. Tissue culture to remove a viroid is really, really hard. There is a teeny little piece of tissue where the viroid is excluded from, but all of the tissue around that spot has a really, really high level of viroid. And so it's very, very difficult to dissect that out without infecting it as you're taking it out. So it's definitely an advanced procedure. So I would probably recommend trying to find a company with some people that have a lot of experience in that. Because if you try to do it yourself, you may just end up feeling pretty frustrated.
Yeah. So then what about breeding through that? So if you had a parent that, let's say, had this and then another one that didn't, would it come with the offspring, or is it just a chance then, just like with the seeds?
You mean like if you breeding as in you create the seeds and then you plant them and ask which seedlings?
Yeah. So like if you had the mother that was infected and the father wasn't, and you bred those, the offspring then would have the same percentage as you would if you were self-pollinating it, getting the seeds?
Yes. Yeah. So in the studies that we did, the 20 to 50% infection rate it wasn't self-pollination. It was because we wanted to either have the father be infected or the mother be infected to understand the difference there. But it's not 100% in seed. And so whether you're selfing or you're breeding, you should be able to recover seedlings that are not infected.
Wow. This is a new advancement for growers in general. Like I only have been hearing about it in recent years being in the commercial growth space. And I think it's only coming out because the commercial growth space is getting testing. It's like some of these things that we didn't know how long it's been around until the testing was available to find out it was. It worries me in the past of genetics that I was like, this is just a finicky one. And I'm telling people online like, hey, it's finicky genetic. It's like, maybe I just was infected this whole time. And I was finicky because of the growth that it was showing because the viroid. That's a trip.
Yeah.
That's a trip.
So it's in fact, I mean, it happened to us. We've had plants in our basement for a long time. I'll just put it like that. And all of a sudden, we couldn't grow anymore, and everything was coming out terrible. And it was like, is it the pH? Is it the growing medium? And we went through all of the same things until we started this company, and we tried to develop a test, and everything kept testing positive, even the stuff that was our control. And then we're like, wait, the control is the plants in our basement, and those plants are infected and have been for years. So it's one of those sneaky things where you think it's your fault or you think you're doing something wrong and you're just going to change some conditions, but it could definitely be that there's a pathogen in there, and you just need to get it tested.
So it's fair to say, I'm going to joke. It's fair to say more people are infected than we think. There's a ton of people out there that are dealing with this right now.
Yes.
That have no idea.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a scary thought. That's a really scary thought, because as someone and I'm sure you're in the same position, Doc. People are coming to us for answers, and we have an encyclopedia of answers to give, and yet it could be none of those, and it could be this. It could be hop laden viroid,
the plant plague.
Yes,
and yet here we are trying to troubleshoot.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say if you are struggling and you're following, you're doing things mostly right and you still can't figure it out, just get it tested. At least you can cross that off the list as what the problem is. But it's so common that it really could be none of those variables. It could be something that you can't change.
You mentioned it was $10 for a home kit through the dispo, and then you said you send that in for a sample. How much does that cost?
Hydro stores.
or the hydro store?
Yes.
How much does getting the test itself cost?
$25.
God, that's so affordable. Okay, that's awesome. So you're less than $50 because you got to mail it into something in less than $50. Peace of mind to know. And there's people out there that are buying products that are far more expensive than $50 to try to fix their problems that they think they have. So that's quite affordable, and it makes sense that more people should be doing this to try to figure it out, get to the bottom of it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It is very, very common. And if you're bringing something in, I would try to quarantine it, at least put it in a corner away from everything else, and test it before you even start manipulating it, putting it next to your other plants, because it is very contagious. And if you don't test it and you put it in a tent with a bunch of other plants, you stand a really high chance of transmitting that to all of your cultivars. So it's just not worth the risk to bring it in without testing.
And you're saying that you bring them in, you have a far more likely chance of it being infected than not infected. So that's...
it's very common. It's 70 to 80% of commercial facilities, have tested positive for this. And, if you're acquiring clones from a commercial facility, then, or seeds produced in a commercial facility, the statistical probability is just very high because it's just everywhere. It's all over the place. Very common.
And it's good that you can not only test plants, but you can test seeds as well. And I have a feeling that this is going to kind of become a standard in a sense, right? It's like when you're shopping for seeds, ask the breeder, hey, can you send me the hop latent viroid test? I want to make sure that these seeds are not infected, right? So I feel like that's kind of the next level, kind of the direction that we're going. That these breeders are going to have to supply these tests to the customers to prove that they're not just giving them hop latent viroid within the seed.
Yes, absolutely. It really should be a standard, for clones, seeds, everything.
When I go to purchase a dog or an animal, I want all the paperwork with that dog. I want to know that all the testing, all its shots, all of its medicine's been given. And it's becoming more, there's more, almost as much money now in this industry as there is in dog breeding, for crying out loud. So to think that, I think it should be a standard that you should be required or requesting this information from a breeder. And in fact, a breeder should be proud to provide this information that they have an operation that it's not infected. This is a great thing to advertise.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. If I were buying a packet of seeds or clones, I would definitely pick the one that comes with testing data, because then I know that it's going to succeed in the end. So
brilliant. Chris, did you have anything you wanted to?
Real quick before we wrap things up is, we talked all about hop latent viroid being the pathogen. Is there any other pathogens that we need to be aware of that infect medicinal plants?
Yes, absolutely. So two more that I would definitely mention, because they are very, very common, very destructive, are Fusarium and Pythium. So these two pathogens are root pathogens. They're root rots. Fusarium is a fungal infection. It is also very common. It spreads very quickly. If it takes over a plant, it can kill the plant within weeks. It tends to lie slightly dormant when the plant's in the veg phase. When you switch it into flower, that's when it gets that 12-hour light dark cycle. It sporulates very efficiently, and it can kill that plant within a couple weeks. You'll see yellowing leaves, wilting, that kind of thing. It's scary because sporulation means airborne. And once it goes airborne, it can very effectively and quickly infect everything in whatever enclosed space it's in. I would actually venture to say that it's probably the most devastating pathogen in medicinal plants. Hop latent is insidious. This one is just devastating. The other one, Pythium, another rot. It's a water mold. It's actually something called an oomycete. It has very similar symptoms, rotting roots, wilting, dampening off. This one tends to travel through the water, and you can see symptoms both in veg and flower. I will say that we went out and purchased a bunch of plants, just from the store at different areas around Colorado. And I would say a good 80% of them, granted, we were going to places that purposely picking plants that didn't look amazing, but a good high percentage of them were infected with one or the other, Fusarium or Pythium. So if you really want to cover your bets, I would test all three on a new cut. If this is a very expensive cut and you're going to keep it for a really long time and use it in a breeding program, I would test all three. Just make sure that it's clean for all of those, and then at least you're not going to end up with something that there's no treatment that could end up killing everything in the basement or
completely lose your investment.
Yes, exactly. It's don't risk your investment. Just get them tested.
Crazy.
Safe.
Well, maybe we can get you on here in the future to talk more detail about different pathogens. I mean, this was a fantastic talk here, very eye-opening.
Hugely eye-opening.
So,
yes,
appreciate your time coming on here today.
Very digestible too.
I'm like anxious about my plants downstairs again. I'm tested.
Well, I think the anxiety's due. It's in the right spot. I don't think there's a reason to just lose your wits if you're not having an issue, but it's definitely worthy of a portion of the conversation. And you made this very digestible to a point that it's going to make it very easy to continue this conversation. We would love to have you back on to continue this sometime. Thank you very much for being here.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you guys very much for the opportunity to talk, and I'd be happy to talk about more pathogens or
Yes.
Whatever topic people are interested in.
Well, we can't wait to come to Colorado. So
yes, give me a call if you guys shoot me an email or
absolutely.
something.
100%.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Doc, for having a conversation with us today. Very eye-opening, and we appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you guys for inviting me.
If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to support us, go to patreon.com/fromthestash. There are different tiers that you can sign up for and get access to different things, such as early releases, uncensored content. You can get producer credits on our episodes, and you can get a free merch item like the shirt I'm wearing right here. 100% of the funds raised through Patreon goes right back into the podcast. We'll also put a link to the Patreon down in the YouTube description section below. Thank you so much for your support.